Talvaron Sill sat alone in the deepest level of the Great Archive, surrounded by millions of glowing data crystals that floated in the dark like frozen stars. She was young for an Aelori, barely 200 cycles old, and her pale blue skin gave off a soft light as she worked. Her job was simple. She read old files, organized old stories, and made sure nothing important was ever lost. Most days, nothing important ever was. The Great Archive belonged to the Galactic Concord, a coalition of 42 alien species that had ruled the known galaxy for over 10,000 cycles. They had faster-than-light travel, they had worlds beyond counting, and they had peace, or at least the appearance of it. The Concord's enormous flagship, the Infinite Discourse, drifted through the void like a silver city, carrying diplomats, scholars, and soldiers who had not fought a real war in generations. Talvaron was not a diplomat or a soldier. She was an archivist, and she liked it that way. She preferred old stories to new arguments. And today, buried deep in a file so old the translation program almost choked on it, she found something strange. It was a myth. That by itself was not unusual. Every species had myths. The Vreth had legends of fire gods. The Philly sang songs about the deep ocean mother. But this myth was different. It appeared in the oldest records of not one, not two, but every single founding species of the Concord. All of them, across dozens of worlds that had never contacted each other, told the same story. They called them the Pale Wanderers. The details changed from species to species, but the core was always the same. The Pale Wanderers were beings of impossible contradiction. They were soft and fragile, yet they refused to stay down. They lived short lives, sometimes less than a single cycle, yet they built things meant to last forever. They formed bonds of loyalty, not just with their own kind, but with animals, with machines, with anything that moved, and some things that did not. They loved fire, they loved music, they loved war, and hated it at the same time. And in every version of the myth, across every species, there was one warning that never changed. Do not make them care about you, because if they care, they will never stop coming. Talvaron sat back in her chair and let the light from the data crystal wash over her face. She had read thousands of myths in her career. None of them had ever appeared in every culture at once. Myths did not work that way. Myths were local, shaped by the world that made them. A story that showed up everywhere, told the same way, with the same details. That was not a myth. That was a memory. She pushed the thought aside and kept digging. The file was connected to a system tag she had never seen before. She followed the tag through layers of old security clearances. Most of them expired, until she found a single entry buried so deep it might as well have been forgotten. Directive 7. Sol, Class Dormant. Sol. She searched the star charts, a small yellow star on the very edge of the galaxy's outer arm, so far from anything important that no trade route came within 1,000 light-years of it. The file said a survey team had visited the system 12,000 cycles ago and found a small blue planet with primitive life. The dominant species was bipedal, bilateral, carbon-based, and had just discovered how to shape metal. The survey team had watched them for a while, decided they were unremarkable, and placed the system under Directive 7, a quarantine designation that meant no contact, no value, no threat. The file had been closed and never opened again. A single note, handwritten in a script so ancient the translation program took almost a full minute to decode it. It was from the original surveyor, someone named On, and it had been added to the file after the survey team returned. It read, "I have made an error. They are not precognitive, they are pre-patient. Recommend immediate upgrade to Directive 1, Avoid. Surveyor On, recalled." Talvaron stared at the words. Directive 1 was the highest warning the Concord had. It was reserved for species so dangerous that all contact was forbidden. It had only been used 3 times in the Concord's history, and 2 of those species no longer existed. Surveyor On had looked at a planet of beings who had just learned to make bronze swords, and had recommended the highest threat level the Concord had. And no one had listened. The note had never been read. The file had never been updated. For 12,000 cycles, the galaxy had simply forgotten about Sol and whatever lived there. She would have forgotten about it too, if not for the alert that came in that same hour. The deep space sensor stations along the galactic rim were reporting something impossible. Massive energy signatures were moving through the quarantine zone around Sol. The signatures did not match any known drive technology in the Concord's database. They pulsed in a slow, steady rhythm that the sensors struggled to classify. One technician, in a report that was quickly buried, described the pattern as resembling a heartbeat. The Concord's High Senate discussed the readings for exactly 9 minutes before dismissing them. A sensor malfunction, they said. Or perhaps a Vreth weapons test. The Vreth Dominion had been growing aggressive lately, pushing into border systems and threatening smaller species. The Senate had sent formal protests. This was how things worked in the Concord now. Problems were discussed, noted, filed, and forgotten. But Talvarin did not forget. She sat in the archive long after her shift ended, cross-referencing the energy pattern from the sensor stations with every record she could find. And deep in the oldest files, in a folder that had not been opened since before most current species had achieved spaceflight, she found a match. The energy signature was identical to a reading taken 12,000 cycles ago by Surveyor On's ship as it left the Sol system. The last line of On's personal log, separate from the official file, read simply, "They watched us leave. They knew what the stars were, and they were already building." Talvarin's glow flickered and dimmed, which for an Aelori meant something close to terror. She looked at the data crystal in her hand, then at the alert still flashing on her screen, and she understood something that the entire galactic Concord had not yet figured out. The myths were not myths, and whatever had been sleeping at the edge of the galaxy had just woken up. Admiral Cale Drenix stood on the command bridge of his warship, the Iron Verdict, and looked out at the stars with the satisfaction of a predator who had already caught its prey. He was Vreth, 8 feet tall, covered in dark green scales, with eyes like hot amber and a jaw built for crushing bone. Behind him, arranged in perfect attack formation, 300 Vreth warships cut through the darkness toward the Philly homeworld. The Philly were a peaceful species. They were small, aquatic, and gentle. They built beautiful cities under their oceans and composed music that other species traveled light years to hear. They had no army. They had no weapons. What they did have were moons rich in rare minerals that the Vreth Dominion wanted. And when the Philly had politely refused to hand them over, Drenix had been given the order he had waited for his entire career. Take them. The Galactic Concord had sent a formal protest. Drenix had read it aloud to his officers over dinner, and they had laughed until their drinks spilled. The Concord did not fight. The Concord talked, and while they talked, the Vreth took whatever they wanted. He was thinking about what he would name the conquered moons when his communications officer interrupted him. "Admiral, we are receiving a transmission. All frequencies, every channel, audio, visual, quantum, even old radio bands." "From the Philly?" Drenix frowned. "No, sir. From behind their largest moon. The signal doesn't match any known species." "Put it through." The bridge fell silent, and then from every speaker on every ship in the fleet, music began to play. It was a single instrument, something with strings, producing a sound so clear and sad, and it seemed to hang in the air like smoke. The melody was slow. It rose and fell like breathing. None of the Vreth had ever heard anything like it. For a moment, no one moved. Then the sensors screamed. From behind the Philly moon, 12 ships emerged into open space. The word ships did not do them justice. Each one was enormous. The smallest was 3 times the size of the Iron Verdict, and the largest was so big that the sensors needed a full 10 seconds to map its outline. They were not elegant. They were not beautiful. They were rough, angular, covered in scars, weld marks, and patches of mismatched metal. They looked like they had been broken apart and put back together 100 times. They looked like they had been through hell, and it simply refused to stop. They broadcast no identification. They flew no flag. They just sat there, 12 metal giants in the dark, while the music played on. "What are they?" Drenix asked, and for the first time in years, his voice was not entirely steady. His science officer, a thin Vreth named Torek, was staring at his screens with wide eyes. "I do not know, Admiral. Their hulls are layered with some kind of adaptive material. It is changing as I scan it, like it is learning from our sensors. Their power source is, I cannot classify it. The computer does not recognize it. And the life signs. How many crew?" Torek swallowed. "That is the problem, sir. These are not warships carrying crews of a few thousand. Each vessel is registering millions of individual life signs. These ships are carrying entire populations." The bridge was quiet. 300 Vreth warships faced 12 unknown vessels, and for the first time, the numbers did not feel like they were in the Vreth's favor. Drenix straightened his back and bared his teeth, which was what Vreth did instead of taking a deep breath. "Hail them," he ordered. "All channels open, Admiral." "Unknown vessels, this is Admiral Kale Drenix of the Vreth Dominion. You are in a designated military operation zone. Identify yourselves and withdraw, or you will be treated as hostile." Silence. The music continued. A violin, though Drenix did not know that word, playing a melody that was older than most of the Concorde's member species. "I repeat, identify yourselves." "Nothing. Admiral," Torek said quietly, "their adaptive hull material has finished analyzing our scanning beams. It has restructured. I do not think our standard weapons will be effective against it. It learned our frequencies in less than 2 minutes. Drenix felt something cold move through his chest. He had fought border skirmishes, pirate fleets, and rebel factions. He had never faced an enemy that studied him by letting him look at it. But he was Vreth. The Vreth did not retreat. The Vreth did not show fear, especially not in front of 300 ships full of soldiers who believed their admiral was invincible. "Fire a warning shot," he said. Across the bow of the lead ship, the Iron Verdict's main cannon fired. A beam of white-hot plasma crossed the distance between the fleets in less than a second and struck an energy shield surrounding the lead vessel. The shield flared bright gold, absorbed the blast completely, and then went dark. The ship behind it was untouched. Every screen on Drenix's bridge flickered. The music stopped, and then, for the first time, a voice came through the communication system. It was calm. It was tired. It was not shouting, not threatening, not even particularly loud, and it spoke in flawless Vreth, with an accent that suggested the speaker had learned the language not from a program, but from actually listening to Vreth soldiers talk. "You get 1. 2 words. The bridge was completely still. Drenix stared at the speaker as if it had grown teeth. Behind him, his officers exchanged glances. The communication officer's hands were shaking over his console. "Admiral," Torek whispered, "I have been running the energy signature of these vessels against the Concorde's full database. There is only one match. It is 12,000 cycles old. It comes from a quarantine system on the Outer Rim." "Which system?" "Sol, Directive 7, a species classified as dormant." Torek paused. A species the rest of the galaxy turned into a myth. Drenix looked out the viewport at the 12 scarred, massive, silent ships that sat between his fleet and the Philly homeworld. Ships that had come from nowhere, that matched nothing, that had absorbed his best weapon without flinching, and had responded with 2 words that were not a threat, but a fact. He thought about the myths. Every Vreth child heard them. The pale wanderers, soft creatures who bonded with everything, who burned too bright and died too fast, who should have been weak, but never were. He had always thought they were stories told to frighten hatchlings. He was no longer sure. The 12 ships hung in the dark, waiting. Not attacking, not retreating, just waiting, with the patience of a species that had spent 12,000 years preparing for this exact moment. And somewhere aboard the largest of them, a woman Drenix had never met was sitting in a captain's chair, watching his fleet on a screen, and giving him time to make the right decision. He did not make the right decision. "All ships," Admiral Drenix said, and his voice was hard and sharp and full of every ounce of pride the Vreth had ever carried. "Battle formation. Full assault. Destroy them." 300 warships powered their weapons. 12 ships did nothing at all. And the music started again. Captain Lena Vasquez watched the Vreth fleet open fire and felt nothing but sadness. She sat in the command chair of the UES Perseverance, the largest of the 12 human arcs, and the ship that had been her home for 23 years. She was 52 years old. Her dark hair was streaked with gray. A thin scar ran from her left temple to her jaw, a gift from a hull breach on a colony world that had tried to kill her when she was 30. She had fixed the hull, planted crops in the dirt the next morning, and never complained about the scar. That was the kind of person she was. That was the kind of person humanity chose to lead. Around her, the bridge crew of the Perseverance worked in focused silence. There was no panic, no shouting, no dramatic orders. Every person at every station knew exactly what to do because they had trained for this moment their entire lives. Not trained for war. Trained for the possibility that the galaxy would not be kind, and that someone would have to stand in the way. 300 Vreth warships fired everything they had. Plasma beams, kinetic rounds, antimatter warheads, the combined firepower of a fleet that could have burned a continent to glass struck the 12 human arcs in a wave of blinding light. The shields held for 90 seconds. On the Vreth flagship, officers cheered. On the human ships, weapons officers watched their screens and waited. At 91 seconds, the shields dropped. The Vreth saw this and cheered louder. They poured more fire into the now unshielded human ships, expecting to see hulls crack and armor melt. But the hulls did not crack. The armor did not melt. Instead, something happened that no Vreth science officer could explain. The adaptive armor on every human ship was changing. It had been watching the Vreth weapons for 90 seconds, analyzing every frequency, every energy type, every impact pattern. Now it was restructuring itself, molecule by molecule, hardening specifically against each weapon the Vreth used. Plasma beams that should have cut through metal splashed off like water. Kinetic rounds that should have punched through hull plates bounced away like pebbles thrown at a mountain. The armor was learning. The shields had not failed. They had been dropped on purpose. The humans needed combat data, and the fastest way to get it was to let the enemy shoot them. Armor adaptation at 94% across all vessels, the tactical officer reported calmly. We have full profiles on all Vreth weapon systems. Lena nodded. She looked at the main screen, where 300 Vreth ships were still firing uselessly at her fleet. And she took a slow breath. She did not want to do what came next. She had spent her whole life building things. Colonies, farms, schools, hospitals. She had never wanted to be a warrior. But she had learned, as every human eventually learned, that sometimes the only way to protect what you loved was to stand up and show your teeth. All ships, she said quietly, Begin. The human counterattack lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. It did not look like the battles in HFY War Stories, where fleets clashed in glorious chaos for hours. It looked like surgery. The 12 human arcs moved with coordination so precise it seemed choreographed. Because it was. Every human ship was linked through a tactical network that shared data faster than any crew could speak. They did not aim for reactors or bridges. They aimed for engines, weapons, and communication arrays. Kinetic slugs, traveling at a fraction of light speed, struck HFY ships in exactly the places that would disable them without destroying them. Electronic warfare systems shut down targeting computers and navigation. One by one, HFY warships went dark, still intact, still alive inside, but unable to fight, unable to run, and unable to call for help. And then the boarding parties came. Hatches opened on the sides of the human arcs, and thousands of small, fast shuttles launched into the gaps between the disabled HFY ships. Each shuttle carried a squad of humans in powered armor. The armor was not shiny or elegant. It was scratched, dented, and painted with names, the names of people who had worn it before and not come home. The humans cut through HFY hull plates with plasma torches, entered the ships, and moved through the corridors like ghosts. The HFY soldiers who tried to fight them discovered several things very quickly. First, humans were smaller than HFY, but they were faster. And in the zero-gravity corridors of a disabled ship, size meant nothing, and speed meant everything. Second, humans did not fight alone. Each squad moved as a single unit, connected by neural links that let them share sight, sound, and intent without saying a word. A human soldier could see through her teammate's eyes, feel what he felt, react to threats before they appeared. It was not telepathy, it was technology driven by a species that had always believed its greatest strength was each other. Third, and most disturbing to the HFY, the humans were not trying to kill them. They used stun weapons. They used restraints. They disabled HFY soldiers with precise, non-lethal strikes, and then moved on. When they found wounded HFY, they stopped. They knelt down, opened medical kits, and treated the injuries. One human medic, a young woman with red hair and steady hands, spent 3 minutes setting a broken arm on a HFY soldier who had just tried to stab her with a combat knife. The HFY soldier stared at her in complete confusion. In 4 minutes and 11 seconds, it was over. 300 HFY warships, the pride of the Dominion's military, were disabled and silent. Not a single one was destroyed. Not a single HFY was dead. 11 humans were injured, 2 seriously. Approximately 4,000 HFY were wounded, all of whom received medical attention from human field medics before the hour was out. Admiral Drenix was found on his own bridge, restrained to his command chair with a material he could not break. A human soldier was sitting on the floor nearby, eating something from a small packet. When Drenix snarled at him, the soldier offered him some. It was a ration bar. Drenix ate it anyway, because he had not eaten in 12 hours, and because the sheer strangeness of the moment had broken something in his understanding of the universe. A medic arrived shortly after and treated a cut on Drenix's head that he had received when his ship lost power and he fell from his chair. The medic was gentle, professional, and called him Sir without any trace of mockery. When she finished, she offered him water. He took it. He drank. He said nothing. On the Concorde flagship, far from the battlefield, Talvarin Sil watched the sensor data in stunned silence. The entire engagement, from first shot to last, had taken less than 5 minutes. 300 ships defeated by 12. 0 deaths on either side. It was not a battle. It was a lesson. She had received a direct transmission, not routed through the Concorde's communication network, but sent straight to her personal archive terminal, through security protocols that should have been impossible to bypass. The sender was identified only as UES Perseverance. She opened it with trembling hands that glowed faintly blue. The message was short. It was written in simple Aelori, grammatically perfect, as if someone had taken great care to learn her language properly, rather than relying on a translator. It read, "We know you found the file. We have been waiting for someone to read it. We would like to talk." It was addressed to her by name, not her title, not her rank. Talvaren Sill, Archivist. She sat in the blue glow of her console in the deepest level of the Great Archive, and for the first time in her 200 years of life, she felt the overwhelming and terrifying sensation that the universe was much larger, much stranger, and much more wonderful than she had ever been taught to believe. She began composing a reply. The shuttle that carried Talvaren to the Perseverance was small, simple, and human-built. It smelled like metal and something else, something warm and organic that she could not identify. The pilot was a young human man who smiled at her when she boarded and said, "Welcome on board. Watch your step. The gravity shifts a little once we dock." He spoke Aelori with a slight accent, and when she asked where he had learned it, he shrugged and said, "Night classes." The Concord Senate had told her not to go. Loremaster Uvan had begged her not to go. The Vreth ambassador had called it a trap. But Talvaren was an archivist. Her entire life was built on the belief that truth mattered more than comfort, and the truth was sitting inside a scarred metal ship the size of a city, waiting for someone brave enough to come and hear it. But she went anyway. Nothing could have prepared her for what she found inside. She had expected a warship, gray corridors, weapons lockers, military discipline. What she found was a world. The interior of the Perseverance was vast, and it was alive in a way that no Concord vessel had ever been. The first thing she saw when the airlock opened was a tree. A real, living tree, with green leaves and brown bark, growing from actual soil in a courtyard flooded with artificial sunlight. Children were playing beneath it. Human children, small, loud, laughing, chasing each other in circles, while a dog ran with them, barking with pure joy. Talvaren stopped walking. She had never seen a dog. She had never heard a child laugh with that kind of freedom. On Aelori ships, children were quiet. They studied. They meditated. These children were covered in dirt and completely happy. The corridors were wide and painted in colors. Murals covered the walls, depicting landscapes she did not recognize. Mountains, oceans, deserts, forests, cities of glass and stone, earth. They had painted their home on the walls of their ship so they would never forget where they came from. There was music drifting from somewhere, not the violin from the battle, but something with rhythm, something with a beat that made her want to move in ways her body did not know how to move. She passed a school where a teacher was explaining mathematics to a room of teenagers. She passed a hospital that smelled like clean linen and something sweet. She passed a workshop where an old man was building a chair by hand out of real wood, singing quietly to himself. She passed a temple, and then another temple of a different kind. Humans, it seemed, had not agreed on their gods, but they had agreed that everyone deserved a place to seek them. The ship smelled like rain, bread, engine oil, and flowers. It was the most alive place she had ever been. Captain Vasquez was waiting for her in a garden. Not a meeting room, not a war room. A garden, full of vegetables growing in raised beds under sun lamps. Lena was on her knees in the dirt, planting small red fruits into the soil. She looked up when Talvaren approached, wiped her hands on her pants, and smiled. "Tomatoes," she said, holding one up. "They are not strategic. They are not important. But my grandmother grew them, and her grandmother before that, and I think that is reason enough." They sat on a bench between rows of green plants and talked for hours. Lena spoke slowly and carefully, not because she thought Talvaren was stupid, but because what she had to say was heavy, and she wanted every word to land right. She told the story of humanity. They had found the Concorde's quarantine beacons 700 years ago. They had decoded them, studied them, and understood exactly what they meant. The galaxy had looked at Earth, looked at humans, and decided they were not worth knowing. The file had been closed, the system had been forgotten. We could have been angry, Lena said. Some of us were. But anger burns out. What replaced it was worse, at least from the galaxy's perspective. We became patient. Humanity had spent 2,000 years advancing in total silence. They had built ships, not sleek, beautiful ships, but tough ones, ships designed to break and be rebuilt, ships that could carry not just crews, but entire civilizations. They had colonized dead worlds that the Concorde had ignored, worlds too harsh, too cold, too hot, too broken for anyone else to bother with. They had turned wastelands into homes, through nothing but stubbornness and refusal to die. Their technology was not elegant, it was practical. It worked because it had been tested by failure, over and over, and rebuilt each time a little stronger. Every ship in our fleet is named after a disaster, Lena said. The Perseverance is named after a rover we sent to Mars before we even had faster-than-light travel. It was small and slow, and it should not have lasted as long as it did. But it kept going. That is what we do. We keep going. Talvarin asked the question that had been burning inside her since she first opened that ancient file. Why did you come now? Why not sooner? Why not later? Lena's face changed. The warmth did not leave, but something heavier settled behind her eyes. We have been watching. For centuries, we have been watching the galaxy. We saw the Concorde grow comfortable. We saw the Vreth grow hungry. We saw 12 species go extinct in border conflicts, while the Senate debated procedure and passed resolutions that no one enforced. We told ourselves it was not our business. We told ourselves we were not ready. She paused and looked at the tomato plant beside her. Then we intercepted a signal from the Philly homeworld, a distress call, sent on a frequency so old that most modern ships cannot even detect it. It was encoded in pure mathematics, the one language that does not need translation. It said, in the simplest terms possible, "We are here. We are afraid. Is anyone listening?" Lena looked at Talvarin. Every species in the Concorde had the technology to hear that signal. 42 civilizations, 10,000 years of cooperation, and not one of them was listening. We heard it on the other side of the galaxy, from a system everyone had forgotten existed, and we came. Talvarin felt something crack inside her. Not her body, her understanding. She thought about the Concorde, about its endless debates, and its beautiful ships, and its perfect protocols, and she realized that somewhere along the way, all 42 species had forgotten the reason they had come together in the first place. They had built a civilization so large and so old that it had lost the ability to hear a single simple cry for help. And humanity, the myth, the legend, the species the galaxy had thrown away, had heard it. The myths, Talvarin said quietly, the pale wanderers. Every species tells the same story about you. Lena nodded. We know. We found the records. Some of your species met our ancestors thousands of years ago, back when we were still on Earth. Traders, explorers, surveyors. They came, they saw us, and we frightened them. Not because we were strong, because we cared about things we had no reason to care about. We adopted animals that could kill us. We mourned strangers. We ran into burning buildings to save people we had never met. Your ancestors did not know what to do with that, so they turned us into legends and buried the memory. They sat in silence for a long time. Somewhere in the garden a bird sang, a real bird, descended from species brought from Earth in cages and set free inside the arcs. Then Lena's communicator chimed. She listened, and her face went still. The Vreth Dominion is mobilizing its full military force, she said. 40,000 warships. Their target is Sol. They want to destroy Earth. Talvaren felt her light dim with fear. What will you do? Lena stood up. She brushed the dirt from her knees. She looked at Talvaren with eyes that were tired and sad, and absolutely completely certain. Signal the Arcs, she said into her communicator. All of them. It is time to come home. Talvaren's voice was barely a whisper. How many Arcs are there? Lena smiled, and in that smile was 2,000 years of patience, loss, and unbroken hope. The Vreth Armada arrived at the Sol system, expecting a graveyard. 40,000 warships, the largest military force ever assembled in the history of the Galactic Concord, dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system, and aimed their sensors at the small blue planet orbiting the yellow star. Earth was still there. It was blue and green and wrapped in white clouds, and it was the most beautiful thing Admiral Drenix had ever seen, though he would never have admitted it. It hung in the darkness like something precious, like something worth protecting. And for one brief moment, before he remembered why he was there, Drenix understood why the humans had crossed the galaxy to defend a world most of them had never set foot on. Then his sensors updated, and he stopped thinking about beauty. The planet was surrounded by orbital platforms, hundreds of them, old and scarred and clearly built over centuries, each one bristling with weapons that his science officers could not fully classify. But the platforms were not what made his blood run cold. The Arcs were coming home. They arrived from every direction, from the galactic core, from the outer rim, from the empty spaces between spiral arms, where no sane species would build a colony. They came through routes the Concord had never mapped, through systems the Concord had never explored, from worlds the Concord had written off as worthless. And they kept coming. Not 12, not 50, not 100, 914 Arc-class vessels emerged into the Sol system over the course of 11 minutes. Each one was a city ship, massive and scarred and alive with millions of human beings. Each one broadcast the same identification signal, repeating on every frequency, in every language the humans had ever learned, which turned out to be all of them. We are still here. The combined human fleet did not surround the Vreth Armada. They did not form attack lines or power their weapons. Instead, they arranged themselves in a massive sphere around Earth, a living shield between their home and the force that had come to destroy it. 900 ships, carrying the entire scattered civilization of humanity, standing between the Vreth and a small blue world. Not threatening, not posturing, protecting. Drenix stared at his tactical display. The numbers were clear. His 40,000 warships were outnumbered in raw tonnage by a factor he did not want to calculate. He had seen what 12 of these ships could do to 300 of his best. The mathematics of 900 against 40,000 were not in his favor. And every officer on his bridge knew it. But it was not the numbers that broke him. It was the transmission. Captain Lena Vasquez's voice came through on every frequency in the galaxy, not just to the Vreth, not just to the Concord, to everyone, every species, every world, every ship with a receiver. This is Captain Lena Vasquez of the United Earthship Perseverance, speaking on behalf of the human species. We did not come to conquer. We did not come to rule. We came because you forgot what it means to stand for each other, and someone had to remember. Her voice was calm and clear, and carried the weight of a species that had spent 2,000 years alone in the dark, building, dying, rebuilding, and never once giving up. To the Vreth Dominion, you came to destroy our home. We will not allow that. But we will not destroy yours either. We are not your enemy. We are the answer to a question you stopped asking. What happens when someone chooses to protect instead of control? You can fight us, you will lose, or you can stand down and we can begin." The transmission ended. Silence filled the space between the fleets. 40,000 Vreth warships faced 900 human arcs around a small blue planet that should have been insignificant, but somehow was not. Drenix stood on his bridge and felt the weight of the moment pressing down on him like gravity. He thought about the battle at Philly. He thought about the human medic who had treated the cut on his head and offered him water. He thought about the ration bar that had tasted terrible and the soldier who had shared it without being asked. He thought about 300 ships disabled in 4 minutes with 0 deaths, and he understood something that his pride had not allowed him to see before. The humans could have killed every Vreth at Philly. They had chosen not to. They could destroy his entire armada right now. They were choosing not to. This was not weakness. This was the most terrifying kind of strength. The strength of someone who could end you and decided, every single moment, not to. He opened his mouth to give the order to stand down. He was not fast enough. A faction of 200 Vreth ships, commanded by captains who were younger and angrier and more afraid than Drenix, broke formation and charged the human fleet. They fired everything, a desperate, furious assault, driven by pride and terror in equal measure. The human fleet responded, not with rage, not with overwhelming force, with the same surgical, terrible precision they had shown at Philly. In 5 minutes and 43 seconds, all 200 rebel ships were disabled, engines dead, weapons offline, communications severed, crews alive, not a single Vreth killed, not a single human ship damaged. The remaining Vreth fleet watched in absolute silence. Then, one by one, warships began powering down their weapons. The lights on their hulls shifted from red to white, the Vreth signal for standing down. It spread through the fleet like a wave, ship after ship after ship, until 40,000 points of red light had turned to white, and the space around Sol was quiet. Drenix was the last to give the order. He sat in his chair for a long time, looking at the blue planet on his screen. And then he said, "Stand down. All weapons offline. Open communications. Tell them we would like to begin." In the weeks that followed, the galaxy changed. The Galactic Concord did not simply reform. It dissolved. 10,000 years of bureaucracy, politics, and institutional decay came apart. And in its place, something new began to grow. Humanity did not take a seat of power. Lena Vasquez, when offered the position of Supreme Chancellor, laughed. Not cruelly, but with the genuine amusement of someone who had been offered something absurd. "We did not come here to lead you," she told the assembled representatives of 42 species. "We came here to remind you how to lead yourselves." Humanity shared its technology freely. Not weapons, never weapons. Instead, they gave the galaxy terraforming methods that could turn dead rocks into gardens, medical science that could extend lives and cure diseases that had plagued alien species for millennia, energy systems that were clean and nearly limitless, food production techniques born from centuries of making barren worlds feed billions. They asked for nothing in return except one thing. "Remember us," Lena said, "not as myths, not as monsters, not as gods, as neighbors. That is all we ever wanted to be." The Vreth Dominion signed a peace accord. It was not easy, and it was not quick, but it happened. Admiral Drenix, to the shock of his own government, became one of its strongest advocates. When asked why, he said simply, "I have seen what they can do when they choose to fight. I would rather see what they can do when they choose to build." He never spoke about the medic who had treated his wound, or the water she had offered, or the way she had called him sir. But those who knew him said he was never quite the same after that day. Telvarin Syl returned to the archive, but she did not stay there long. Over the following years, she became the galaxy's foremost historian of humanity. She traveled to their arcs, walked their colony worlds, sat in their gardens and their schools and their temples. She learned to eat tomatoes. She learned that humans cried when they were happy, and laughed when they were afraid, and sang when they had nothing left. And that every single one of them carried, somewhere on their person or in their heart, the name of someone who had not survived the journey. She wrote a book. It took her 40 years. It became the most widely read text in the history of the galaxy, translated into every language of every species, including several that had gone extinct before humanity arrived, and were only preserved because humans had found their records and kept them safe. The final paragraph of the book was read at the ceremony where humanity was formally welcomed into the new Galactic Union, not as members, but as founders, standing equal with species that had traveled the stars for 10,000 years before humans had learned to make fire. Talverin read it herself, standing at a podium on a terraformed world, where human and alien children played together in fields of grass beneath a sky that had been dead rock 50 years before. Her voice was steady, and her skin glowed brighter than it ever had. We called them myths because the truth was too frightening. Not that they were powerful. We had known powerful species before. Not that they were clever. Cleverness is common in the galaxy. What frightened us was that they were kind. Relentlessly, stubbornly, irrationally kind. They crossed the darkness between stars, not because they wanted to rule what they found, but because they could not bear the thought that someone, somewhere, might be alone and afraid and calling out for help that would never come. In 10,000 years of civilization, 42 species built an empire of silence. Humanity walked out of the dark, scarred and stubborn and singing, and reminded us what it was for. She closed the book. The audience was silent. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, a human began to clap. Then another. Then an alien joined in, awkwardly, because their species had never clapped before. But the gesture felt right. The sound spread until it filled the sky. Thousands of hands and claws and tentacles beating together in the first shared applause the galaxy had ever known. Above them in orbit, the Perseverance hung quietly among the stars. Its hull was still scarred. Its armor was still patched. On its bridge, now empty and dim, a small violin sat in a case on the captain's chair, waiting for someone to pick it up and play. The music had stopped, but the song was just beginning.